Eleanor Blackwood had always believed that money couldn't buy you love, but she'd never imagined it could purchase such elaborate betrayal. Standing in the marble hallway of her Beacon Hill mansion, clutching legal documents that represented $500 million and a lifetime of careful planning, she pressed herself against the mahogany paneling and listened to her 3 adopted children discuss her impending death with the casual enthusiasm most people reserved for weekend plans. "The old bat's finally going to kick it," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that particular brand of entitled smugness she'd somehow missed during 18 years of birthday parties and college tuition payments. "Dr. Harrison says 6 months, maybe less. Cancer's spread to her liver." Sarah's laugh tinkled like expensive crystal hitting marble. "Thank God we won't have to keep pretending much longer. Do you know how exhausting it is to act grateful for her little lectures about responsibility and giving back?" The papers in Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, not from her illness. The cancer diagnosis was still her secret, shared only with her physician, but from the razor-sharp clarity that sometimes comes with having your entire worldview restructured in under 30 seconds. She'd raised these children from infancy, loved them fiercely, built her entire estate planning around ensuring their security and happiness. The irony was almost artistic in its cruelty. "The inheritance meeting is tomorrow," James added, and Eleanor could picture him lounging in that insufferable way of his, feet up on her grandmother's coffee table. 3 ways split of everything. The houses, the stocks, the art collection will finally be free of her holier-than-thou charity obsession. Eleanor closed her eyes and let their words wash over her like ice water, each sentence a small death of its own. Free of her charity obsession. The charity work that had defined her adult life. The foundation she'd built from nothing. The countless hours spent ensuring that children like them, abandoned, neglected, forgotten, might find families who actually wanted them. The foundation she'd assumed they'd continue after her death, carrying forward a legacy of genuine care rather than performative obligation. She'd been planning to announce the inheritance terms tomorrow, a carefully orchestrated revelation designed to surprise them with the magnitude of their good fortune, while also ensuring they understood the responsibility that came with such wealth. Instead, she found herself the audience for a preview of her own funeral, complete with reviews of her character that would have been devastating if they weren't so perfectly crystalline, clarifying. "We should start looking at properties in the Hamptons," Sarah continued. "Somewhere we can actually entertain without her disapproving stare every time someone lights a cigarette or mentions politics." Eleanor opened her eyes and looked down at the legal documents in her hands. The will, signed just last week, the trust documents. The carefully structured plan to transfer everything to Marcus, Sarah, and James in equal shares, with the expectation that they would honor her commitment to the Blackwood Foundation and continue supporting the various causes she'd championed throughout her life. How wonderfully naive she'd been, how thoroughly, completely, embarrassingly naive. She walked quietly to her study, each step measured and deliberate, her mind already working through possibilities with the kind of cold precision that had built her fortune in the first place. The cancer might be claiming her body, but her brain remained sharp as ever, and right now it was focused on a problem that suddenly seemed far more urgent than her mortality. The Blackwood Foundation occupied 3 floors of a converted brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue, its walls lined with photographs of smiling children, grateful families, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies that had marked decades of quiet, persistent good work. Eleanor had built it methodically, the way she built everything, with careful attention to detail, sustainable growth, and an unwavering focus on actual results rather than publicity. The foundation provided educational scholarships, supported foster care transitions, funded medical treatments for children whose families couldn't afford them, and operated a network of safe houses for teenagers aging out of the system. It was, without exaggeration, her life's work. And according to her children's casual kitchen conversation, it would die with her. Eleanor sat in her leather chair and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number for James Morrison, her estate attorney. Brilliant, meticulous, and possessed of the kind of moral flexibility that made him invaluable when navigating complex ethical terrain. He answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, how are you feeling?" His voice carried genuine concern, which was refreshing after the evening's revelations. "I've been better, James, but I'm calling about the will." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need to make some changes before tomorrow's meeting." There was a brief silence on the other end. "What kind of changes?" "We just finalized everything last week, and the documents are already prepared for signing." "The beneficiaries," Eleanor said simply. "I want to change the beneficiaries." James Morrison had handled enough wealthy families to know when not to ask questions immediately. "I see. And who would you like to name instead?" Eleanor looked out her window at the foundation building across the street, its windows still lit despite the late hour. Maria Santos, the executive director, was probably still there, working on grant applications or reviewing case files. Maria had started as a scholarship recipient 20 years ago, worked her way through Harvard Law School, and returned to run the foundation with a combination of strategic brilliance and genuine compassion that Eleanor had come to depend on entirely. If anyone understood the true value of the work they were doing, it was Maria. "I want everything to go to the foundation," Eleanor said. "The entire estate. Houses, investments, art, everything. I want it endowed in perpetuity, with Maria Santos as the primary executor." James was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, that's a complete restructuring. Are you certain about this? What about Marcus, Sarah, and James? They're expecting exactly what they deserve," Eleanor interrupted. "Nothing." She could almost hear James's mental wheels turning, calculating the legal implications, the potential challenges, the sheer audacity of disinheriting 3 adult children in favor of a charitable foundation. "This is going to cause problems," he said finally. "They'll contest it. Family members almost always have grounds to challenge complete disinheritance, especially adopted children who can claim emotional damages." Eleanor smiled for the first time in hours. "James, I didn't become one of the wealthiest women in Boston by avoiding problems. I became wealthy by solving them creatively. Can you meet me at the office first thing tomorrow morning, before the family meeting?" "Of course. Eleanor, can I ask what prompted this change?" She looked at the legal documents spread across her desk, documents that represented decades of careful planning, suddenly rendered obsolete by 10 minutes of overheard conversation. "Let's just say I received some new information about my children's true feelings regarding my legacy. Information that clarified some things for me." After hanging up with James, Eleanor sat in the quiet of her study and allowed herself a moment of genuine grief. Not for the money had never been the point, but for the family she'd thought she'd built, the love she'd thought she'd cultivated, the legacy she'd thought she was leaving behind. She genuinely believed that Marcus, Sarah, and James cared about her work, understood its importance, felt connected to the mission of helping children who'd experienced the same abandonment and uncertainty they had. She'd been wrong about that, spectacularly and completely wrong. But that didn't make the loss any less real. Eleanor had learned long ago that the most effective revenge wasn't hot and immediate, but cold and precisely calculated. Tomorrow's family meeting would proceed exactly as planned, with one small modification that would change everything. She spent the next hour on her computer, researching legal precedents, reviewing trust structures, and crafting a plan that would ensure her true wishes were honored, while making it nearly impossible for her adopted children to successfully challenge the decision. By midnight, she had a strategy that was legally bulletproof, morally satisfying, and utterly devastating to 3 people who had just revealed themselves to be everything she'd spent her life working against. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Eleanor's study as she reviewed the revised documents James Morrison had prepared overnight. He'd worked with his usual efficiency, incorporating her changes into a trust structure that would protect the foundation's interests while creating a philanthropic legacy that could continue indefinitely. The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 o'clock, and Eleanor heard Marcus, Sarah, and James arriving for what they believed would be the most profitable morning of their lives. She listened to them chatting in the foyer, their voices bright with anticipation, and felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Sometimes the most important gift you can give someone is the truth about themselves, even if they're not going to enjoy receiving it. Eleanor positioned herself in the formal living room, the revised legal documents arranged neatly on the antique coffee table, and waited for her children to join her. The morning light filtering through the tall windows cast everything in sharp relief, highlighting the Persian rugs her grandmother had collected, the oil paintings that had been in the family for generations, and the fresh flowers Maria Santos had sent from the Foundation's garden project. A small weekly gesture that had always touched Eleanor's heart more than her children's expensive, obligatory gifts. Marcus entered first, wearing his best suit and that particular smile he reserved for occasions when money was involved. Sarah followed in designer everything, her expression carefully composed into what she probably thought looked like appropriate solemnity. James brought up the rear, checking his phone with the kind of casual disrespect that had always irritated Eleanor, but which she'd chalked up to generational differences. How charitable she'd been in her interpretations of their behavior, how willing to excuse and rationalize and forgive. "Please sit down," Eleanor said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing her. "I know you're all eager to hear about the arrangements I've made." Marcus settled into his chair with barely contained excitement. "Mom, we just want you to know how grateful we are for everything you've given us. The education, the opportunities, the love. We know this can't be easy for you to discuss." Eleanor studied his face, looking for any trace of genuine emotion behind the practiced words. She found none. "The love," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, let's talk about love for a moment." She picked up the legal documents, letting the weight of them settle in her hands. "I've spent considerable time thinking about what it means to leave a legacy. What it means to pass on values, not just valuables. What it means to ensure that the work you care about continues after you're gone." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the papers. "We understand completely, Mom. We know how important the foundation is to you, and we want you to know that we're committed to continuing your work. We've talked about it extensively." Eleanor's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Have you? When did you have these discussions?" There was the briefest pause, a microscopic hesitation that confirmed everything Eleanor suspected. "Well, we've always known it was important to you," James said quickly. "And we respect that. We want to honor your wishes." Eleanor set the documents down and looked at each of her children in turn. 3 adults she'd raised from infancy, 3 people she'd loved unconditionally, 3 individuals who had just lied to her face with the smooth confidence of lifelong practice. "I'm curious," she said, her voice conversational. "What aspects of the Foundation's work interest you most? Which programs do you think are having the greatest impact?" Marcus shifted in his chair. "Well, all of them. Really, the scholarship program is wonderful, of course. And the transitional housing initiative," Sarah added quickly. "That's made such a difference for so many young people." Eleanor nodded slowly. There was no transitional housing initiative. She'd made up the name on the spot, and her children had just enthusiastically endorsed a program that didn't exist. "What about the medical assistance program?" she asked. "How do you think we might expand that?" "More partnerships with hospitals," James suggested confidently. "Broader eligibility requirements. Maybe extend it to cover dental care." Eleanor had to admire the creativity. The medical assistance program covered dental care, and had for over a decade. "These are all thoughtful suggestions," she said. "It's clear you've given this serious consideration." The lies came so easily to them, flowing like water, each fabrication building on the last, until they'd constructed an entire alternate reality where they cared deeply about work they'd never bothered to understand. Eleanor felt a strange kind of relief. She'd been second-guessing herself since last night's overheard conversation, wondering if she was being too harsh, too reactive, too final in her decision. But watching them lie to her face with such practiced ease, she knew she'd made exactly the right choice. "Before we discuss the specific terms of my will," Eleanor said, "I want to share something with you. A few weeks ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. The doctors tell me I have perhaps 6 months. She watched their faces carefully, looking for genuine shock or sorrow or fear. Marcus managed appropriate widening of the eyes. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, in a gesture of surprise that looked rehearsed. James leaned forward with concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. They already knew. Of course they already knew. The performance was, for her benefit, one final courtesy extended to the dying woman who controlled their inheritance. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Sarah said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Is there anything we can do? Any treatment options?" Eleanor shook her head. "The doctors have been very clear about the prognosis, which is why I wanted to finalize these arrangements now, while I'm still able to ensure everything is handled properly." She picked up the documents again, and the room fell silent except for the ticking of her grandmother's grandfather clock. "I've given considerable thought to how best to honor both my values and my responsibilities as your mother. How to ensure that the work I care about continues, and that you three are provided for in a way that reflects your true relationship to that work." Marcus practically vibrated with anticipation. Eleanor could almost see him mentally calculating square footage of Hampton's properties. "The bulk of my estate," Eleanor continued, "including this house, the investment portfolio, the art collection, and all other assets, will be transferred to the Blackwood Foundation, to be held in perpetual trust for the continuation and expansion of its charitable mission." The silence that followed was profound and telling. Eleanor watched the progression of emotions across their faces. Confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning fury that they couldn't quite suppress. "What about us?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. "What provisions have you made for us?" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a particularly warm smile. "I've given each of you exactly what you deserve, based on your commitment to my values and your genuine care for the work that has defined my life." She opened the folder and withdrew 3 small envelopes. "Marcus, you'll receive a trust fund that will provide you with $50,000 annually for the next 10 years, provided you complete 200 hours of volunteer work each year at a registered charity of your choice." The same arrangement applies to Sarah and James. Sarah's composure cracked first. $50,000? Per year? For 10 years? Her voice rose with each word. "That's nothing. That's insulting. We're your children. We've been your children for over 20 years. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression serene. "Yes, you have been my children. And as such, you've received excellent educations, comfortable upbringings, extensive opportunities, and significant financial support throughout your adult lives. I've paid for your apartments, your cars, your graduate school, your travel, your business ventures. I estimate I've invested approximately $2 million in each of you over the years." James's face had gone red. "This is ridiculous. You can't leave everything to the foundation. We're your family. We have rights." "You do have rights," Eleanor agreed. "You have the right to contest this will. Though I should mention that James Morrison and I have structured the trust in a way that makes successful challenges virtually impossible. You also have the right to be grateful for the education and opportunities I provided, though I notice gratitude doesn't seem to be your strongest suit." Marcus stood up abruptly. "This is because we don't share your obsession with those charity cases, isn't it? Because we want lives of our own instead of spending every waking moment worrying about strangers' problems?" Eleanor's smile widened. "Charity cases. How interesting that you'd use that phrase." She reached into her purse and withdrew her phone, tapping the screen until she found what she was looking for. "I'm curious, Marcus, at what age does someone stop being a charity case? Is it 18? 21? Or does it depend on how much money they inherit?" Marcus's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean that 3 days ago, you were foundlings, abandoned children, charity cases." Eleanor's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Sarah, you were left at a fire station when you were 6 weeks old. James, you were removed from your birth parents at age 2 due to severe neglect and drug exposure. Marcus, your teenage mother dropped you at a hospital and never returned. I found each of you through the system I've spent my life supporting, and I brought you home because I believed every child deserves love and opportunity, regardless of their circumstances." The room was absolutely silent now. Eleanor could hear traffic passing on the street outside, the hum of the heating system, the tick of the grandfather clock marking seconds that felt like hours. "So when you refer to the children I help as charity cases," Eleanor continued, "you're referring to yourselves. When you dismiss my obsession with helping abandoned and neglected children, You're dismissing the very system that brought us together. When you speak with such contempt about my life's work, you're expressing contempt for the only reason we became a family. Sarah's carefully applied makeup was beginning to smudge around her eyes. That's not fair. We were children then. We couldn't help our circumstances. No, you couldn't. Just like the children I help now can't help theirs. The difference is that those children are grateful for the assistance they receive, and they understand that privilege comes with responsibility. You three have apparently learned different lessons. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window, looking across the street at the foundation building where Maria Santos was probably already at work, reviewing applications from young people who understood exactly what second chances were worth. I loved you, Eleanor said without turning around. I loved you completely and unconditionally, and I gave you every advantage I could provide. I asked for nothing in return except basic decency and perhaps some small appreciation for the values that shaped our family. Instead, I got performers who could mimic affection when it served their interests. She turned back to face them, and her expression was neither angry nor sad, but simply resolved. The foundation will receive the bulk of my estate because the foundation actually cares about the work. Maria Santos and her team understand what it means to help children who have nowhere else to turn. They don't see charity cases when they look at struggling families. They see human beings deserving of dignity and support. They don't view compassion as an obligation to be endured, but as a privilege to be embraced. Marcus made one last attempt. Mom, please, you're upset, and I understand that, but we can work this out. We can be more involved with the foundation. We can... You can... What? Eleanor interrupted. Pretend to care about work you've spent 20 years ignoring? Fake enthusiasm for values you've consistently demonstrated you don't share? Continue lying to me with the same smooth confidence you've shown this morning? She walked back to the coffee table and picked up the legal documents. The truth is, Marcus, that your mask slipped yesterday evening. All of your masks slipped. And once you see behind someone's performance, you can't unsee it. Eleanor had always believed that the most effective conclusions were simple and final, without unnecessary drama or extended explanations. She handed each of them their envelope containing the details of their modest trust funds, along with a business card for James Morrison's office. If you'd like to contest the will, James Morrison will be happy to explain why that would be both expensive and futile. If you'd like to accept the terms I've offered, the volunteer requirement begins immediately and will be monitored by an independent agency. Sarah was crying now, mascara tracing dark lines down her cheeks. This is cruel. This is vindictive. We made mistakes, but we're still your children. We still love you. Eleanor considered this for a moment. Sarah, I heard you laughing about how exhausting it was to pretend gratitude for my lectures about responsibility. That doesn't sound like love to me. It sounds like performance anxiety. She walked to the door and opened it, holding it wide. The foundation meeting is at 2:00 this afternoon. Maria Santos will be announcing the new endowment and the expansion plans it will make possible. You're welcome to attend if you're genuinely interested in learning about the work that will now define the Blackwood legacy. Otherwise, I think we're finished here. They filed out in stunned silence, their dreams of Hamptons estates and European vacations evaporating with each step. Eleanor watched them go and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete certainty that she'd made exactly the right decision. She called Maria Santos to schedule a meeting for later that morning, then sat down at her computer to draft a statement for the foundation board. There would be press attention, almost certainly. Stories about the wealthy widow who left everything to charity instead of her children would generate headlines and probably some criticism. Eleanor found she didn't care. She'd spent her life trying to build something meaningful, and now she'd ensured it would continue long after she was gone. The money would help thousands of children over the decades to come, providing scholarships and medical care and safe housing and all the small miracles that made the difference between survival and thriving. That felt like a legacy worth leaving. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Eleanor, I heard the wonderful news from James Morrison. I can't express how grateful I am, or how committed we are to honoring your vision. The children we serve will benefit from your generosity for generations. Eleanor smiled and typed back. The children you serve deserve everything we can give them. They're not charity cases. They're our future. Outside her window, Boston hummed with its usual energy. Traffic moved along Commonwealth Avenue, students hurried between classes, tourists photographed historic buildings, and in a brownstone across the street, dedicated people worked quietly to make the world a little bit better for children who needed someone to believe in them. Eleanor's legacy was secure, her conscience was clear, and she had perhaps 6 months to watch it all unfold. For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt genuinely optimistic about the future.